top of the Tuesday night, everybody. Chris McDonald with you on this Tuesday night, April the 2nd, 2024. We're so grateful to have you tonight, and we're always grateful to have old friends back with us, but I want to emphasize the friend part, not the old part. Professor Nic Giordano, good to see you. PASreport.com. And I was telling him before the show, we always enjoy having this man on. He's a good man, good patriot, got a lot of knowledge, a lot of insight. And I wish I could just rewind my clock about 40 years maybe and be in your class in college. I might have learned a little bit more than I did with these ones I was in back in the 80s. I would have loved sitting under you and learning a bunch. It's good to see you tonight on the McFiles. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you, Chris?
I'm good. I want to tell you, I was telling you before too, look, we're honored to have you on the McFiles. We really are, but you do an excellent job when you're on Fox with Gutfeld at night. I've seen you, and I think that format of the discussion, there's such a wide variety of personality sometimes on that show, and but I like the interaction, with people, because it's what makes the world go around, it's what makes America go round, and all the diverse opinion. But we're grateful that you're on our network here as well. Listen, I want to start off tonight with something, because it's sort of. It didn't shock me that RFK said this today, but I hope that most Americans heard it. He was on CNN, so probably only like 15 people in all of America watch CNN anymore. So we want to bring this up tonight on the McFiles. We hope more than 15 are watching the McFiles tonight. But he said something that was very profound today, and the left is going up in smoke about it tonight, which is, I look at it this way. It's a damn good day in America when the left is upset. That means something is being done right in this country. But he said that Joe Biden was more of a threat to democracy than President Trump did. And I'm quoting him here. He said, there's a big difference between somebody that simply questions an election than somebody that censors free speech and basically sends his goons after people that are expressing opinions. You teach political science and, politics and the things that we deal with on this network and other networks. These are opinions. And if we can't say what's on our mind, Professor, we no longer have America. We've got a communist state. And I think we're bordering on that tonight. I thought what he said was profound. I'm not a fan of RFK. But in this case, I give him kudos tonight. I think he's right on. What say you, my friend?
Well, when someone's right, they're right. You have to give them credit for
Absolutely.
that. And I'm going to separate this out into two different categories. So the first category is President Biden. And is President Biden the real threat to democracy, not former President Trump? And then I want to talk about the bureaucracy and look at if the bureaucracy is a threat to democracy and not former President Trump. So when we look at President Biden himself, what do we know? Well, we know that he was using his White House to flag posts for Facebook and other social media companies, working with those social media companies to censor political opponents. We also know that President Biden himself tried to force millions of Americans to get vaccinated, a vaccine that they didn't want. And if they didn't get that vaccine, then he was going to destroy their livelihood. They would be laid off from the federal workforce. They would be laid off from their contractor position. And so if you didn't do what he said, you're going to have your livelihood destroyed. Then on top of that, when we look even further about the threat to democracy that really exists, and we are a constitutional republic, we're not a real democracy.
Great point.
But when we look at this threat, he's the only president that I know of in my lifetime that gave an entire speech warning how his patience and his administration's patience with the American people was wearing thin because they didn't want to abide by his draconian decrees. I've never seen a president threaten at least 50% of the country.
That's right.
Then the president goes and he declares nearly half the country as the biggest threat since the founding of this country. The MAGA Republicans are the biggest threat since the founding of this country. They're a bunch of fascists. They want to destroy our constitutional republic. And so we have to defeat them. And then you look at the Biden's Department of Justice, where they're targeting political opponents and they're trying to take down a former president of the United States because they view him as a threat. So when we talk about threats to democracy, we routinely see Biden and the Biden administration that actually do represent a much greater threat to the bureaucracy, that they want to control what we say, what we hear, what we could think, who we could support. They're trying to prevent RFK Jr. from getting on ballots in a number of states. And that obviously is the antithesis of democratic principles. In a real republic where you have this idea of democratic principles infused into the system, you want anyone and everyone to run if they're eligible. If they meet the qualifications, you shouldn't have to sit there and try and fight it. But that's exactly what this administration is doing. Now, are they succeeding? The answer is no, they're not succeeding. I think that there is a vast majority of Americans that do see that this administration is authoritarian by nature, that they constantly push the limits. You have President Biden himself using the FBI as his secret police force, chasing down Ashley Biden's diary, which isn't an FBI matter. The FBI is like a political tool of his. But I don't view President Biden as the threat, because he's not. Just like Trump and Biden, these are one person in a moment of time, right? Both of them. Okay, this country is much bigger than one person. Now let's look at the bureaucracy. And if we look at what the bureaucracy has done over the course of the last 20 years, that's where the real threat to our republic exists. We have an NSA that adopted the PRISM program that collected the metadata of every single American in this country. Their phone calls, the times, the length of the phone calls, the phone numbers that were called, the dates and times of the calls. They collected emails, they collected internet data, internet search data, putting it all in a huge database under this Total Information Awareness program that became the PRISM program on the NSA.
Exactly right.
Then, if we fast forward, what do we see? Well, we see the IRS through Lois Lerner targeting conservative groups that she didn't like, groups that went against her ideological philosophies. And so we see the abuses there. We see Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States under the Obama administration, openly defy Congress with his Fast and Furious program. Congress has oversight over all the departments and agencies, and Eric Holder said, consequences be damned. I don't have to answer your questions, and I don't have to turn over documents to you. Even though you're a duly elected body within the United States, you're the legislative body, you have the power of oversight. I simply don't care. I'm not going to comply. He's held in contempt and nothing happens.
Nothing happens.
Then in 2014, you have the Central Intelligence Agency get caught spying on sitting members of the United States Senate Intelligence Committee. The Senate Intelligence Committee was investigating the CIA for enhanced interrogations to try and determine whether or not they crossed any boundaries. They were exercising their power of oversight. And what did the CIA do? Well, they spied on members of the United States Senate Intelligence Committee and their staff members. Now, the CIA stated that they did this in order to make sure that no information leaked out, no classified information leaked out. But that's a bunch of nonsense. First of all, it's not the CIA's jurisdiction to make sure that classified information doesn't leak out. That would be an FBI jurisdiction, if anything. But secondly, and I think more importantly, is the fact that the only reason for the CIA to be monitoring members of the United States Senate, they're not allowed to operate on U.S. soil. They are solely allowed to conduct foreign intelligence operations overseas. And if a foreign agent or a foreign asset comes into the United States, they can monitor that individual. They are not allowed to monitor Americans, especially sitting members of Congress. And yet they did it. And the only reason I could think of them doing it, not that they admitted this, I will say that in full disclosure, is they wanted to dig up dirt on members of the United States Senate to use it against them if they tried to go after the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, when the Senate found out, the senators were outraged, but they didn't do a damn thing. And it shows you the power that these bureaucracies had. They didn't do anything about it. Even though John Brennan was caught red-handed, not a single person that was involved in this spying was suspended, not a single person fired, not a single person charged with a crime. And so they got away with it. Then we saw the whole Trump episode, right? Well, we had James Clapper and John Brennan lie about the government spying on the American people first. Then we get into the whole Trump investigations. They started a phony Russian collusion investigation, working with the Hillary Clinton campaign, all based off of false information that they knew to be false at the time. They tried to use the media to verify Christopher Steele's report. That's not the way it's done. And it's because they despised the former president. That turned into the Mueller investigation. A special counsel was appointed. And it turns out that there was nothing there. So we see how it was weaponized to target Trump. And it didn't end there. We had the Russian bounty story where they were paying Taliban officials to kill Americans, and Trump knew about this and didn't do anything. It was all lies. Okay, so time and time again, we see the bureaucracy abusing its power. You have the Department of Homeland Security that is monitoring Americans. You have the ATF that has amassed over 2 billion gun records. Now, they're not allowed to build a database, okay? According to congressional statute, the ATF is forbidden to build a gun registry database. So why are they collecting all these documents pertaining to gun owners? Why are they collecting all this information pertaining to gun owners if they're not building out a database? You have the United States Postal Service that's supposed to be dealing with mail. Now, you have postal inspectors that if there's mail fraud, they go investigate. They have the power of law enforcement. They're special agents. They go arrest you and everything. However, we know through the ICOP program, that they were flagging social media posts and sending them over to the Department of Homeland Security. Why is the United States Postal Service monitoring social media accounts using keywords? That's not in their jurisdiction to do, yet they did it. Then you look at the Department of Homeland Security, and you have the CISA director. So under DHS, you have CISA, Jen Easterly. She stated that she wants to move cognitive thoughts, that's the way we think, into critical infrastructure protection. And the justification is that cognitive infrastructure is extraordinarily important, especially with all the misinformation and disinformation. Well, that's a means to try and control the flow of information. In November of 2021, the Biden administration published the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. I covered this extensively on my podcast because it was the most horrifying document I ever read. It talks about domestic violent extremists, but when you read through the document, it is so vague that it labels anyone that's engaged in anti-government, anti-authority sentiment as being a potential domestic violent extremist. The first question that comes to mind, well, what defines anti-government or anti-authority? And there's nothing really there. It's not defined. It's vague on purpose because it could be interpreted any which way. And the examples that they do use all happen to coincide with a Democrat agenda. Now, in Pillar 1 of combating domestic terrorism, it talks about creating these private-public partnerships. And we've seen that play out, right? You have the corporate world, the financial institutions that freely turn over information about their customers to the government agencies without any warrants or anything. Okay, then you also have in this document, the only way it says to eradicate domestic terrorism is to put in place gun control, to infuse diversity, equity, inclusion into our curriculums and talk about how horrible and racist our country is. It's to spend more money on social programs so that people don't gravitate to it. So it's a left-wing agenda. And if you disagree with that left-wing agenda, the question becomes, are you a domestic violent extremist or a potential to be one? Then you look at the FBI. And the FBI sent out a memo. This happened in the Richmond office over in Virginia about traditional Catholics. Now, I'm Roman Catholic. I follow my faith. I take it pretty serious. And this memo stated that traditional Catholics have a greater tendency to be domestic terrorists and that they should infiltrate churches to try and start getting informants in churches. Now, the FBI director stated, well, that was just in Richmond. You know, when we found out about that, we pulled that memo immediately. We're investigating it. We're now like 2 years later, and it's still being investigated. But it turns out that was a lie, too, that it was going on in Oregon. It was going on in California as well, and I believe Washington, too. So we see them targeting traditional Catholics. We see the FBI targeting parents at school board meetings, parents that are angry about what their children are learning, parents that believe that they should have a say. And so we see that happening. So when we look at this idea of threats to democracy, well, no, the bureaucracy represents the biggest threat to democracy. Because guess what? Everything I just mentioned, not a single person has ever been held accountable. Nobody's been suspended. Very few have been fired. I mean, your Andrew McCabe's, yeah, okay, you got rid of those guys. The Peter Strzok's you got rid of. But nobody faced any real consequences. They got their pensions. They got their little parachutes into CNN and MSNBC, making millions of dollars. There was no repercussions. You look at the Afghanistan war, 20 years of warfare, 20 years, nearly $2 trillion spent, 2,400 lives lost on American soldiers coming back in flag-draped coffins, tens of thousands wounded, life-altering injuries. And the whole time we're told that we're making progress, that the Afghan government is stable, that the Afghan security forces have the capacity to defend the government. And then what happens? President Biden announces we're withdrawing. And literally, we didn't even leave yet, and the entire country collapses, and the Taliban recaptures the country. As we're withdrawing, we have to get permission from the Taliban to get our troops out. Astonishing. And the Taliban is better armed and equipped today than they were prior to September 11th. That's astonishing to me.
Astonishing, it is.
And yet not a single person in the span of 20 years that told us that, no, it's all going to end well, it's going to be perfect, that the Afghan government's really strong and stable, and we're building this thriving democracy. Not a single person was demoted, suspended, fired. Again, government's the only job that you can routinely fail at and still get promotions. It's the only one. But when we look at threats to democracy, right, I would say that the bureaucracy actually represents the biggest threat to democracy. Not President Biden, certainly not former President Trump. We know what 4 years of him was like. He didn't abuse his power. He didn't turn the FBI loose on political opponents.
Great point.
Okay, that's what this administration wants to do.
Exactly right.
But it's the bureaucracy that is certainly the ones that believe that they're the guardians of democracy.
Or actually
they're the ones you need to worry about.
Absolutely.
They're constantly invoking this idea of democracy, yet they're willing to destroy every tenet of all the democratic principles because they believe it's in our best interest. They have little regard for the American people. They view the American people as part of the peasant class. But most importantly, they've all forgotten what public service really means. They've forgotten that they're there to serve the public. Instead, they believe they're there to rule over the public. That people are too dumb to know what's in their best interest, and so the people made a mistake in 2016 by voting for Trump, and we can't let that mistake happen again. And they're willing to destroy everything to try and make that a reality. That's the frightening aspect.
Oh, very much so. You've laid out an excellent argument, and I'm with you. But I do want to ask you a question. It's a twofold question. Number one, who do you lay? And I hate when I say blame. We always blame something on everything. We want to blame the sky is blue on somebody these days. It's not a blame question, but where did we go wrong in this country to bring us to this point that this bureaucracy has gotten so much out of hand? As you stated rightly and correctly, no one's been held accountable because, when I listen to my audience and I listen to people out in the John Q. public and friends and family, this is the most frustrating aspect of government that most people have, Professor, is that me and you, to do that stuff that you just described, we'd be having this interview behind bars tonight. I'd be having my computer, I'd have them be bringing me a computer on my desk in a 4-foot cell, and you would be answering the questions in a 4-foot cell. But it just seemed like you said, the people in power get away with this crap. And I think the American public are piss poor tired of them not being held accountable. The question is, how did we get here? But the second question is a little bit harder. Is there any avenue to where they can be other than the ballot box in this country? Because if the Justice Department is corrupt, it's sort of like the fox protecting the hen house, correct? Because you got to have some kind of legal recourse. I know we got recourse in the voting ballot, but I'm just going to be honest with you. I saw a meme about Jack Nicholson the other day, and he said, my faith in humanity is that I look both ways on a one-way street. And when I think about people voting in this country, that's my faith in the voting booth, because people just vote stupid. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. That's Chris's 2 cents. What's Professor, how do you answer that? I mean, do you feel like this is remediable, or do you think that this is going to continue? And Where did we get off into this? Because this is really a serious thing that we're at. We're at a very dangerous precipice in this country, my friend. Look, I don't know if we're even bordering on communism anymore. What you just described to me is communist Russia. I had James R. on last night, and he said it. He said, and we all laughed about it, but then the more I thought about it today, he was right. Russia's scared we're about to import socialism back to them, buddy.
Well, I mean, the remedies I'll talk about in a minute, but first, how did we get here? And it's actually fairly simple. It's the people.
Absolutely.
You know, we're constantly blaming the politicians. We're constantly blaming Democrats and Republicans. But at some point, we got to look internally at ourselves and what we're responsible for. Because if it wasn't for us, this beast wouldn't have gotten out of control.
That's right.
The reality is that we are the guardians over the system, not some pencil-neck bureaucrat down in Washington, D.C., we're the guardians of this system.
Come on,
but
buddy.
over the years, a few things have happened. First of all, Americans have disengaged from the political process, and that's been a really big problem. It doesn't matter what party we're talking about. You look at voter turnout. The voter turnout in the United States is absolutely abysmal. Abysmal. From local elections, which is pathetically low, even though local government actually has much more of an impact on most people's lives than the federal government. But local governments, we see election turnout between 10 and 20% of the people that are eligible to vote actually come out and vote. That's pathetic. In New York City, I cannot find a single person that's happy with the current conditions in New York City. Not a single person. Everyone's miserable. And yet in the November 2023 elections, voter turnout was only 7%. That's it. Meaning 93% of those eligible to vote.
That's right.
93% of those people that are in that misery decided, oh, it's not worth it. I'm not going to vote. So the people are responsible. When it comes to statewide elections, the numbers improve slightly. It's about 25 to maybe 50% if the governor's running for office. And when we look at federal elections, particularly the presidency, it's only anywhere from 46 to about 56% of the peak voting age population is going to turn out to vote. Now, there's people that will say, well, my vote doesn't matter. Well, it's that ignorance that got us to this point. But it's not just the voting that's become a problem and how we vote. The second thing that's a problem is, unfortunately, every single issue that emerges in the United States, we turn to government to solve. Many people have been conditioned to think that government can solve problems, but it cannot. Government can try and mitigate some of the problems that we face, but it can never really solve problems. And a lot of times when you actually look at it, once government gets involved, the problem metastasizes and gets a lot worse. But it's conservative, Republican, Democrat, progressive, it doesn't matter. The second something happens, everyone turns to the federal government to solve that problem. And it's why most of the issues that should be state and local issues have become federalized over the course of the last 2 decades.
So true.
So that's been a problem, that we constantly look to government. The third thing that's a problem was 9/11. You know, when 9/11 happened, I was maybe my senior year of college. My thesis, my graduating thesis, was on how we're entering a new paradigm and we're crossing a line that should not be crossed. I've been a conservative my whole life. I warned that the Founding Fathers would not want to empower the government with something like the Patriot Act, that it goes way too far. And I said that if we're going to do it, we better be careful. We better, keep an eye on this because it will spiral out of control sooner or later. Sure enough, it has. But when you spoke out against the Patriot Act after 9/11, well, you were criticized, right? Do you want to see another 9/11 attack on U.S. soil? If you're not doing anything wrong, you shouldn't have anything to hide. You shouldn't have anything to worry about if they listen in on your calls. And that was Republicans that were pushing that message.
You're right.
So, we do bear responsibility in that. The fourth thing is that most of us have not received a real civic education, an understanding of our history, our founding, why the Founding Fathers created this system of federalism after the collapse of the Articles of Confederation, why the Founding Fathers felt that it was so important to have the separation of powers and the checks and balances in place, and the warnings that the Founding Fathers gave. The Founding Fathers wrote tons of pieces on how when governments come into power, there's only one trajectory. It's for them to gain more and more power. And so they wanted to make things as difficult as possible. That's why the legislative process takes so long in our country, because it's very difficult to navigate. And the Founding Fathers made it so slow and awkward and complex and inefficient on purpose. Yet, when you look at the poll numbers, right, Congress always has the lowest approval ratings. It hovers between 13 and 17%. And the number one reason that people give for despising Congress by a margin of 87% is that Congress doesn't do anything. That's a good thing. You don't want them doing something for the sake of doing something. But what people don't realize is that there's a little authoritarianism in each and every one of us. Because guess what? It's not that they want Congress to be doing something. I mean, if you have a Republican Congress and the Democrats mad that, Congress isn't doing anything, well, I'm sure their approval of Congress is not going to increase if they're pumping out Republican legislation. Just like if you have a Democrat Congress, I'm sure Republicans aren't going to look favorable.
We lost your sound, Professor. We lost your sound. Hang on just a second. Hang on, folks, just 1 second. We lost the professor there. Hang on. He was going good there. Let me see what we got going on here. Hang on just a second. There we go. Now we're back. There we go.
All right.
Sorry about that. We got gremlins on the line tonight. There we go.
We're granting more and more powers to the government constantly and routinely because we don't understand our role in the system. And then we don't understand our obligations. We're constantly putting demands on government. But what's our obligations in our society? What's our obligations in our community? Most people, we have to vote and pay taxes. And once in a while, we might have to do jury duty. No, we have civic obligations too, but we've become so detached as a society. I'm a member of the Knights of Columbus. I'm one of the youngest members there. Okay, most of the members, they're much more senior. You don't see young people getting engaged because they're not taught to get engaged. And when you don't have people getting involved in these civic organizations, they don't understand the idea of community service and charity. When the government does things, people need to realize that's not charity. You're being forced. You're being compelled to do something. When you do it of your own free will, that's when it becomes charity. So when I'm giving back to the community, when I'm volunteering my time at a homeless shelter, or I'm handing out food to homeless people or people that are needy. Well, if I'm being forced to do that, I'm not doing it out of the goodwill of my heart.
That's a great point.
When I'm volunteering to do it, then it actually means something.
It means something. Exactly right.
And we've forgotten those important concepts. So we have been the ones that have led this system astray, and the politicians then get to do what they want. They get to be the politicians they want to be, right? Because
right point.
We're not holding them accountable. And it's not to say that we shouldn't, that the politicians shouldn't be doing their jobs. Congress has the ability to oversight. They should exercise it. But what I mean by it is we're so quick to complain about everything, yet we don't get involved. We don't volunteer. We don't make calls to Congress. And I'll just give you one quick example that I found fascinating in my classroom. My students had 2 years of their lives stolen from them throughout the coronavirus. 2 years of their life. I'm in authoritarian state of New York. And 2 years of their lives were stolen from them. And I'll bring it up in class quite often, actually, because I'm very aggravated about everything that took place during COVID. It was a complete violation of everything the United States stands for. But what was amazing was TikTok, right? So you have Congress that's talking about banning TikTok, the House of Representatives, and I knew this would happen. So I go into my classroom and I'm like, today's topic, TikTok. What do you guys think? And it was amazing. They all came to life. Students that haven't said a word all semester, all of a sudden they're animated. They want to get involved in the discussion. It's not fair. This is censorship. It's a violation of free speech. Some supported the idea of banning TikTok. Most did not, though. 90% of them use TikTok. And so in the middle of my classes, and this happened in every class I teach, in the middle of my classes, I'm like, I find this really interesting. You see how animated you are. We know that a slew of young Americans are now contacting, they're picking up the phones, they're calling members of Congress. It got so bad that Congress actually had to shut off the switchboard because they were getting so many calls.
Wow.
Where were you during the coronavirus?
Great point.
Why weren't, so an app,
Come on.
and I understand, yeah, it could be good for some people, but let's be honest here. In life, apps are meaningless. If we lose all these apps tomorrow, it's not realistically going to change our lives all that much as far as the ordinary American. It's going to hurt those that their businesses are apps, but it's not going to hurt the ordinary American if apps disappear tomorrow. But they were so adamant about the government overstepping its boundaries when it came to a stupid app. Yet when it came to the government taking away their rights, locking them down in their homes, keeping them out of school for nearly 2 years in some cases, determining when, where, and how they could practice their faith, determining whether business is essential or non-essential, which may be their parents' business, when the government was forcing vaccines on them, when they were forcing the masks on them, determining who could come into their homes, how many people, and where they could go, and what they must wear when they leave their homes. You didn't hear them.
No, it was silence.
It was silence.
Silence.
You heard crickets. There was some that may have spoke up, but for the most part, there was crickets. And these kids missed major life milestones socially, and it inhibited them. Learning loss is through the roof. The academic achievement gap has widened dramatically. And they said, well, that's not a fair comparison. You know, we were facing a pandemic. And I said, okay, well, two things. You're right. It's not a fair comparison. It's apples to oranges. You losing your liberties is far worse than losing an app.
Come on, buddy. Come on.
Losing an app. Secondly, you could say it was a pandemic all you want, but there's nowhere in the Constitution that says this Constitution gets suspended during a crisis. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that state legislative bodies could get bypassed so that governors, little Mussolini wannabes, could impose their decrees at will. Doesn't say that.
True.
And so you remaining silent during the coronavirus is actually far worse than TikTok. But what was amazing when you actually think about it, TikTok educated the students more on civic engagement in 1 week
than all this is done.
The entire K through 12 system. I mean, my students have been in school for at least 13 years before they get to my courses. And it seems that TikTok did a better job. Most of my students prior to my course had no idea that they could pick up the phone and call members of Congress. Mm-hmm. They simply thought members of Congress exist to pass laws. They don't understand that members of Congress have to deal with constituency issues, that they are your advocates in the federal government. So one of the lessons that was well prior to the TikTok debate was the fact, and I explained to them, well, if you get denied from student loan, financial aid, you could appeal it, and your appeal will probably be denied as well. You'll call them up, and they're just going to give you the cold shoulder and hang up on you. Now, what if you called your member of Congress, spoke to their office, and their office calls up the Department of Education? You think they're going to pick up the phone? You think if a member of Congress is advocating on your behalf that you might actually, it doesn't mean you're going to get your way, but you have a better shot at getting your way if a member of Congress is advocating for you in the federal department. And they were stunned. They didn't know that you could call members of Congress. So in 13 years of schooling, they never learned that. Yet in my class, or 1 week of using a TikTok app, they did. And that's the amazing part.
Well, you know, what's amazing to me, too, is a lot of adults that got upset about the same thing. It wasn't just kids. And I think you laid out what you just laid out has been something that has been hard to express on this show without you mentioned the blowback, because people are always quick to fall back on the fraud and the malfeasance in the elections. And I've never told the audience ever that I didn't believe that there was some probably shenanigans going on. There's been shenanigans going on in every election since the day we elected George Washington, probably. But you can't use that as a crutch to not look in the mirror and understand that the problem, Professor, is us. The problem is the American public. We have allowed, and I'm a man of faith too, and I look at it this way. God gave us this freedom, and we are stewards. Every generation, I think it was Ronald Reagan that said we're only one generation away from the torch of liberty being snuffed out. In other words, if one generation don't guard liberty, if one generation don't take it seriously, then once it's gone, I've always said this, it's harder to get something back once it's been lost than it is to fight for it. And it's like we take it for granted that the next generation is going to do our job for us, and they're going to preserve their liberty that we just peel away. And as you said, we give it to the hands of the bureaucrats. And this college thing, look, I had a 22-year, I was just talking to my nephew about this today. He is a few years older than my youngest, and my youngest was a COVID kid, sadly, during college. His first college year, the COVID thing was raging here in Tennessee, and they basically confined him to a dorm room. And I mean, he lived like he was in a concentration camp. And
yeah,
it was terrible. And he had enough. And it's taken me 2 years to get him back in school, because in his mind, he thought that every college that he would go to would probably do the same thing. And I said, no, it was a freaky thing. UT was stupid. Don't listen. Don't believe this is how it's going to be forever. But they warp these kids, Professor, and it's terrible. But I look at what you just said about the TikTok. Even my 22-year-old, it's not like he fought against that. It warped him. He gave up. He threw his hands up. But they do get involved with this social media stuff. And adults are more ready to fight over a Facebook post or a Twitter post than they are to fight for the freedom of their freaking country. And it frustrates me. And that's why Chris is going gray-headed. And I scream sometimes, and I shouldn't scream. But listen, we got about 10 minutes. I do want to run something by you real quick tonight. And thank you for being with us on this Tuesday night. I know I don't take it for granted that you could be with your family and you take your time out with us. And I deeply appreciate you coming on talking about this thing. It's been a good... I hope people have heard what you've had to say tonight and taken it to heart. It's very important. The other story I wanted to just run by you briefly. Israel had a hiccup today in their Gaza incursion. Prime Minister Netanyahu came on and apologized for this American kitchen worker that got hit in a drone strike, and I think there was an Australian that got killed. Media is going apoplectic crazy tonight, as you can expect. The leaders of the world, everybody, all the anti-Semites among us, they're just having a field day with this one. And I want to ask a simple question to my audience tonight, and I want to ask your question too and get your take on this. Where's the same outrage? It sort of goes to what we're talking about now. You have outrage over TikTok, no outrage over the loss of freedom during COVID. When 6 Americans got killed in the incursion on October the 7th by Hamas, because there were Americans that got killed in that terrorist attack. There have been Americans that have died in hostage. They were taken hostage and they died. This administration has said very little, and it's, pardon my French, it's pissed me to heaven. Because it's like, if I was president and a terrorist organization had killed my people, let me tell you something. I wouldn't have to have Israel asking me to come in there and get involved in their conflict. I'd be over there, and that freaking terrorist organization would have a hole in it the size of Texas, because you don't mess with the American people. Israel, in a legitimate operation that's trying to kill the terrorists, a drone, and you know, Professor, when these things go on, these conflicts, these wars go on, things happen in war. I mean, they happen in World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, every war we've ever been in, things have went bad, and we make mistakes, and countries make mistakes. It seemed like you would have thought that Israel started Armageddon tonight in the media and in our government. Why is this ugly double standard? I know the spiritual reason behind it, but I'm asking a political professor, why is the world so quick to condemn Israel for the death of and I'm not taking any kind of less sympathy for that kitchen worker. Our prayers are with that family tonight, because we don't like anybody to die. But why is it that the world is having convulsions tonight over that kitchen worker and that Australian, which we again wish our deepest sympathies to, but yet there was absolute freaking silence from these same people when the 6 Americans or 7, how many ever it was, got slaughtered by Hamas, because they killed our people too. And there was not an outrage on them. I'm going to let you take it over. We got about 10 minutes. Roll with it.
Well, it's because most of them are frauds out there.
Come on, buddy.
That's what it comes down to a lot. The way I pose everything, so I don't even dig right into the whole Israel-Hamas thing. First, I propose a hypothetical to the student body maybe, and I'll say, all right, Mexican cartel crosses over into the Texas border. They claim that the land is occupied, that we stole it from them, and they killed 700 Americans.
Come on, buddy.
what do? And you'll hear everyone say, oh, we go to war, we destroy the cartels, blah, blah, blah. Then I bring it over to Israel. All right, so you have Hamas that goes across the border, kills several hundred, not just Israelis, Americans, French people, Australian people,
several.
Indonesian people. I mean, there was a lot of people from a lot of, I think it was something like 50-something countries. Someone lost someone in the Hamas October 7th savage attacks. But it really is amazing in the mindset of what I'm seeing of people that it's not that they're supporting Palestine. It's almost that they're pro-Hamas. They're actually supporting Hamas and Hamas activities. You could be sympathetic to the Palestinians. That's your free will. I mean, that's your right. But they're pushing Hamas sentiment. Let's be clear about that. So it's not about the Palestinians. You're supporting a terror organization, and it is disturbing. Now, it becomes a little bit more complex and difficult when we're talking about the outrage of governments, all right? A lot of people don't understand how the Middle East works. But when Israel does something, there's always going to be criticism against it. That's publicly. Behind the scenes, there are many countries that are actually encouraging Israel to take it to Hamas. And I'll take it to the Osirak nuclear facility back in, I think it was 1981. Saddam Hussein was building a nuclear facility in Iraq. At the same time, we're providing Iraq, Saddam Hussein, with weaponry to fight the war against Iran. The Iran-Iraq war. And when Israel launched the attacks on Saddam's nuclear facilities, the United States, Jordan, Egypt, all these countries condemned Israel publicly. But behind the scenes, they're like, yeah, good job. They all supported it. They wanted Israel to do it because it would give them cover. We couldn't do it ourselves. Let the Israelis do it. People will come out and protest a little bit, and then things will calm down. I think some of that same sentiment holds true now. When you look at a country like Jordan, King Abdullah does not want Hamas in power. King Abdullah does not like these terror organizations because they represent a threat to his power over in Jordan. And so he wants to see Israel eradicate them. But this is where Middle Eastern politics gets very complicated because it's a dual track. It's two-level game theory. You have to satisfy the international audience, but you also have to satisfy your domestic audience because if it leads to growing outrage, you could be toppled very easily. And so they have to walk a fine line. And it's not like the Jordanian people, many of them, they don't like Palestinians. They're discriminatory towards Palestinians. Same thing in Egypt, same thing throughout the Arab world. The Palestinians do get it discriminated in every single Arab country. That's why they won't take any Palestinian refugees, because they don't want them. And it's truly amazing. Now, what's interesting this time, though, is this administration. Because I understand the idea of publicly criticizing Israel, but behind the scenes you're supporting them. This administration has made clear publicly and behind the scenes that they are not supporting Israel.
Great point.
That they are trying to put immense pressure on Israel to pull back and curtail its operations. But when we look at that, that's disturbing. I mean, Israel is the only democratically elected government in this region. They've been a great ally to the United States. We've been a great ally to them. And the only reason the president is doing this is because it's an election year, let's be honest, and he doesn't want to lose the Arab vote, particularly the Arab vote in Michigan. So the president is trying to satisfy the Arab audience. He's trying to satisfy the Jewish audience. He's trying to placate all these different various special interest groups. And when you try and satisfy everyone and not take any real leadership, you satisfy no one, and everyone's going to despise you equally. And that's exactly what's happened. It looks like the Arabs are starting to abandon President Biden. It looks like the Jews are starting to abandon President Biden because they see him for the fraud he is. But it is disturbing that we're seeing this enormous amount of support, again, not for the Palestinian people, but for actually Hamas. And that's disturbing. I mean, let's be honest. The last time the Palestinians held elections was 2005 in Gaza, and they elected Hamas.
Hamas, they did.
If they held elections again today, well, it's not like we know for sure that they'd vote out Hamas. They may very well do the same thing in Gaza. And that's despite the fact that Gaza, Hamas, has received what? It's from 2012 to 2022, I believe they received $178 billion. Billion, would it be? Now, Gaza is right on the Mediterranean. that could be a major tourist destination.
Yeah.
Yet it's still like a third world country, except there's very rich areas in Gaza. People don't know that, but that's the money Hamas steals for their own people. But when we look at it, that money went to weapons. That money went to arms and training and working with the Quds Force of Iran to conduct these mass murders. And unfortunately, I think the biggest problem that Israel has, they could destroy Hamas's command and control. They could hurt Hamas's operational capabilities, but they're not going to defeat the ideology, just like we're not going to defeat the ideology of Al-Qaeda. The only way you defeat the ideology of Hamas is internally, organically. It's got to come from the Palestinian people. So rather than our government and other governments, including Arab governments, pressuring Israel, what they should be doing is pressuring the Palestinian people to rid themselves of this toxic ideology that's based on death and destruction. And for those that want to talk about colonizers, they're clueless. They have no idea the conflict that's existed in this region. I mean, first of all, they have no idea that wars raged in Israel long before Christianity emerged as a religion and long before Islam emerged as a religion. So true. This is an area that has a long history of wars and death and destruction. And so it's much more complicated than to just say, oh, it's because of colonizers. It's because of white racists. It's because of, Christians and Jews against Muslims. No, it goes well beyond
Way beyond that, buddy. It sure does.
The ideology has to be defeated. The only way that happens is from the Palestinians. Just like the only way Al-Qaeda truly gets defeated is when the Islamic clerics say enough is enough. We're not tolerating it anymore. We want to get rid of the Wahhabi Salafist sect of Islam. And Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, who is a brutal tyrant, I'll admit that. But when he gave that speech saying that's it, no madrasa could teach the Wahhabi Salafist sect of Islam to the people anymore, that did more to hurt Al-Qaeda than what we did in 20 years of war. Okay, again, you could hurt their operational capabilities in the command and control, but you got to destroy the ideology, and that has to come from those within. They're not going to listen to a guy from New York.
That's so true, buddy. Hey, final question for you. I was reading a report today that New York is on the second, there's top 10 states that people are fleeing like somebody's jumping off the Titanic. Not to throw disparaging remarks on New York. I love New York. I love you. I love all you New Englanders.
Oh, I'll disparage it all day long.
But New York has become a hellhole. Are you seeing the people? They're coming to Tennessee, by the way. Tennessee was on we're number 5 of the states that people are fleeing from to. One of the top 5 states are fleeing to is my state, the volunteer state.
You just better hope they're not bringing their politics with
them. They're trying. They're trying. But are you seeing that firsthand, folks leaving? And I know we don't have time to talk about it tonight. Maybe next program I'd like to talk with you about this lawfare that's going on against President Trump a little bit more. But do you think this situation with Letitia James is going to destroy New York City's economy? And I think that they're shredding billions, Professor. Do you think it even matters to them that this Trump derangement syndrome is so deep that they don't even care, or they don't know, or they don't recognize it, or they do recognize it and they're just like, who cares? Y'all leave us if you want to leave us, because it's going to bankrupt the state.
Well, I think New York is like a microcosm for the rest of the country. When we look at it, it's not that these people are smart. It's not like they're calculated or anything. They're actually the most thoroughly incompetent people that are in positions of power. Again, it's only government you could have thoroughly incompetent people in charge of everything. That's what's happened. So when we look at New York, yes, New York has taken a nosedive, and it's not even because of the whole Trump situation. A lot of it has to do with the coronavirus. When you shut down the office buildings, companies were like, oh, you're telling me I don't have to spend $2 million a month in rent anymore? That I could still get the job done without spending, $30 million a year in rent? And so what happened? When we opened back up, well, now corporate buildings are empty. There's so many vacancies. So we're facing a reckoning. The policies, the draconian policies, they're not based in reality. Like, nobody really believes that we're going to be able to move to electric cars in the next 10 years. But they say and do these things. We're going to ban gas stoves. And they say and do these things because they're virtue signalists. They pat themselves on the back that they're doing something that's noble and virtuous. And then when we get closer to those dates, the 2026 and the 2030, well, the can's going to be kicked down the road. Oh, well, we're not ready for it, so we'll make it 2040. And that's what they do. I think we lost about 1.5 million people since 2010, 400,000 over the last 5 years. It's been a disaster. I do think New Yorkers are starting to wake up. I am someone that can't stand when people move out of the state. I understand it's difficult. I live in this state, okay? But I'm not ready to surrender this state. I am going to fight for the state. I'm not ready to give up on it just yet. And I think that as people suffer more and more, as they're seeing crime come into their neighborhoods more and more, places that didn't really see crime, you know, once it starts hurting the elitists, that's when you start to see things change. And a lot of people don't remember. If you go back 24 years ago, New York had a Republican mayor.
They did.
And we also had a Republican
governor. Y'all did.
And so that's not that long ago. In politics, we face cycles, right? California used to be heavily Republican. Now it's solidly Democrat or communist, whatever you want to call it. Okay, but sooner or later, the misery that the people face in California, sooner or later, they're going to start thinking, you know what? Maybe I will take that black face of white supremacy, the Larry Elder, and make him governor, because what we have now isn't working. Sooner or later, when people begin to suffer, that's when they open their eyes. The question becomes, will it be too late at that point? And I think that's what everyone's concerned about. Yeah. Well, I'm optimistic. Yeah. I look at our past. We had challenging times before.
We're going to get to
whether it was fighting the revolution, whether it was developing the United States Constitution, everything almost fell apart after the Articles of Confederation. The War of 1812, 1820s with Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams. You go to the Civil War, obviously, and the 30 years following the Civil War that we didn't have real unification until the Spanish-American War. You look at the 1930s, the 1960s, and the 70s, and the assassination of JFK and Martin Luther King and RFK, the race riots, the Vietnam War, and yet we always came back. We always came together again. And then I got to be born in the greatest era ever, 1980, Reagan coming into play, the longest time of peace and stability in the world. Sure, there were small-scale conflicts, but it was the longest period of international stability that the world has ever seen. And we were dominant. We were proud to be Americans. So it seems like we're on the ropes right now. And it seems like everything's going to hell. And yes, things could quickly devolve into authoritarianism. But we've always bounced back. I'm still hopeful that we could still do that.
Well said, Professor. That really is. And I have to ask you a comical question. Have you seen any racist bridges in New York like they had in Baltimore? I'm curious.
Oh, we got tons of racist bridges.
I figured you did. I figured you did. None that's fallen into the.
If you look at the Army Corps of Engineer report, every year they come out with the infrastructure report. So it's not like the whole Baltimore Bridge thing was a huge shock. It's been rated poorly for decades. And what amazes me is that all the officials in Baltimore are minorities.
That's a great point.
So why wasn't there more actions on the bridge to fix it when we all knew it was a big deal? And even the state governor, the state government of Maryland were well aware of this bridge. Now, a barge crashing into a bridge, it's something that's always possible, but these are rare incidents, so I understand it. But our infrastructure is old and outdated. And I think the bigger question is, didn't we pass a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill last year?
We did.
And what the hell was that bill for if it wasn't to repair bridges and strengthen them like the Baltimore Bridge?
Only in America do we spend $1.2 trillion on infrastructure, and infrastructure don't get fixed. That's the American way these days.
And it was supposed to address the racist roads and the racist bridges.
Everything is racist these days, except Professor Nic Giordano. Buddy, it's been great to have you tonight. Please come back soon. PASreport.com. I'm going to give you 1 minute. Final thoughts, wrap us up. And I appreciate the encouraging word you just said, and I hope people take that it is. Things are rough. Things are rough in the country right now. There's no doubt about it. But we can't lose hope, and we got to keep fighting. We just got to keep fighting for our nation. Let you wrap us up, buddy. Final thought.
Well, I'll just say, the entire American story has been one of American grit, that when we face challenging time, Americans do step up to the plate, and they do meet the challenges. They do overcome the challenges. And yeah, it may seem like doom and gloom now, but it's because most of us have this warped perception. And when we look at our past, we always look at it through a nostalgic lens as if everything was perfect when it wasn't. And so life isn't easy, and keeping a free society isn't easy. But our destiny is in our hands. We, the people, are the ones that are ultimately responsible, not the Republicans, not the Democrats. It's we, the people. And so where we end up is a direct result of what we did, whether to stand up and put an end to all this nonsense we're seeing, or whether we sat back and kept our heads buried in the sand. So our future is our own destiny, and we make our own choice.
We sure do, buddy. Professor Nicholas Giordano, thank you. Now, if I come to New York and find out where you teach, would they allow an old gray-headed McFile network host to come sit with his notebook in the back with no attention and take notes while you're lecturing? Would that be okay? Would they charge me to do that?
They wouldn't be able to say anything. You'd be my guest.
You'll be my guest. Well, I might just surprise you one day. I just like to sit in on some of your lectures. I've learned. You remind me. We got another guy, William Federer. He's a good guy that comes on. He's more of a historian, but you got the political savvy. And I just love guests like you because I soak the stuff in. I learn it. I go back and listen to these network interviews like this, and I learn a lot from you. And I know these kids are blessed to have you as a professor. I'm blessed to have you as a friend, and we're grateful that you're part of this network, buddy. And thank you so much for being with me tonight. I'll see you again next time, okay?
Thank you for having me.
Professor Nicholas Giordano, everybody. Put some fire in that house for him. Good night, Professor. Thank you again. Everybody needs to put some fire in that house for the one and only Nicholas Giordano. What a good guy right there. I'm really proud to have him on the network. James R. was on there last night. I'll get that all for right now. We won't keep you much longer. We've been going about 58 minutes, and I appreciate the professor. He was outstanding. If you've got a question or two, go ahead and put it out. I had pulled up a article, and I forgot to ask the professor about it. We're going to get James R. back on here in a few weeks. And the Blaze Media, I sent it to James, and there was a report out tonight that the FBI violated American citizens' 4A rights 278,000 times. And the Bureau today was blasted over an attempt to put a gloss over this. So 278,000 times the FBI basically violated American citizens' rights. And unbelievable. Unbelievable. But that's the... I'm not going to say what I want to say, what the FBI stands for tonight, because I don't want them knocking on my door later. But that's part of the problem, folks. And these agencies that have exerted all this bureaucratic influence over our country, we have created this monster. And now this monster is one that we must confront. And I don't think we got to how he would solve some of these problems, but it starts with we the people. And it starts with us writing our congressman. It starts with us voting. I know that we get sort of mocked for saying that the problem is voting because everybody in the letter movement believes everything is fraud. Everything is because of this conspiracy theory and that conspiracy theory. And when we don't win an election, it's always voter fraud. It's never that just laziness and apathy. And he himself mentioned that in this last election in New York, only 7% in the special election voted a couple of these special elections. And folks, you can't blame that on a conspiracy theory. You can't blame that on fraud. That's just apathy and laziness. And again, I'm not scolding all that tonight, but I want us to take a good, hard look at ourselves and how invested we are in the stewardship of our country. Look, God, America, America, that beautiful song, America the Beautiful. We actually have recorded that one. It's going to be out on an upcoming project here later this year. But America, America, God shed his grace on thee, crowned thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. We have been given the greatest stewardship of any generation, and that's the torch of freedom. And if this generation, I'm talking about me tonight, I'm talking about you, I'm talking about us adult folks. You know, I hear people all the time say, well, we just got to get these young people on board and get these young people straightened out. No, we need to get these old folks straightened out. We need to get these old folks straightened out because these old folks are just as upset about TikTok as the young people are. there's people that were more upset about what's going on with the TikTok crap than they are about the freedoms that got taken from them and robbed during the 2021 debacle with the coconut cake. And I think Professor Giordano, I never really heard somebody lay out everything that has been done that has carried us to this brink of communism like he did tonight. That is as good as outline as you can ever hear. And I encourage you to go back and re-listen to the network show tonight. Share it out, like it if you haven't liked it. Now, if you got a question or two, if you got a statement or two, I'll take it real quick. Peggy, good to see you. She says, great show tonight. It was an excellent discussion, Outdoory. Good to see you. The tide is turning, Peggy says, in California. Well, we'll see, Peggy. We'll see. You know, he sort of alluded to this, and I will say this, that I've talked to people in California, and I've talked to people in New York that live there. And these blue states, folks, these deep blue states were once red. And if you get out in the populace, if you get out in the countryside, in the rural areas of these states, they're fairly conservative. I mean, I'm not saying they're raging conservative, but they're fairly moderate, middle-income kind of folks that just want to make a living for their family and get the government out of their business. These power cities, these power hubs in California, you've got several of them. In New York, it's mainly New York City and maybe the capital of Albany. But out in California, you're dealing with LA, San Francisco, Sacramento, San Diego, maybe. Those big population centers is what control the rest of the state. They're trying to turn Texas blue. That is exactly why a lot of these people, and he sort of alluded to the politics coming into states. Look, we're concerned about it here in Tennessee. Memphis and Nashville are two of our biggest cities. Knoxville would probably rank 3, Chattanooga 4. And then the far eastern part of Tennessee in Johnson City, there's a little town up there that's a fairly populated city. And this blue tide has overran Memphis. It overran Memphis years ago. It has slowly but crept up on Nashville. And the last bastion of conservatism in eastern Tennessee is where I reside, and that's in the mountains. And they're trying hard because our local governments are being run by liberals. And 99% of the mandates that went out in Knox County was not by the feds. It wasn't by the state. Our governor stood up against it for the most part. It was by the freaking county health departments. And people bowed down to it. Except for a few people like Dr. Stephen J. Smith, and he rallied the people and they disbanded our health department. We don't have a health department in Knox County anymore because they became a bunch of tyrants. And there were some people that saw the danger and they dealt with it. They did it the right way, and the state listened to them, and the tyranny is gone. But they're trying. And we have seen an influx of people from these blue states, and I'm sure a lot of your other states have too. And not all of it's because they're fleeing. They want to bring their hellhole into the heartland of the country, and we cannot let them do that. So, my message to you tonight on this Tuesday night is a simple one. We need to keep fighting for our country like we've never fought for it before. And we need to be vigilant and sober and make sure that we are stewards, good stewards of the freedom that we have been given. If we lose this freedom, folks, I'm telling you, we will not get it back. Once it's gone, America will not come back from it. I have hope that there are some people in America that are coming around. Peggy, I share your optimism. I'll share it for right now. Perhaps California's coming around. Professor says some of the New Yorkers are coming around. I think this thing that happened to Trump has woken up a lot of the business people that realize that this can happen to them. And no matter how their stupid governor went out there and said, well, we just did this to Trump. We're not going to do this to you. Well, yeah, they will do it to you too. Oh, yeah, they will. Don't believe that crap. They always do it to you, even though they'll tell you they won't do it. When a government official tells you they're not going to do something to you, you better pucker up because it's coming. You better pucker up because it's coming, and it's coming double. But I think what happened to Trump was such a travesty that it did wake people up, and perhaps they were being woke up, and this was even another wake-up call. I think of Kevin O'Leary the guy from Shark Tank, and I've watched Kevin O'Leary. He ain't a raging conservative by any stretch of the imagination, but he's out there sounding the alarm on these talk shows and on these networks, and he is decrying what happened to President Trump. And he's not even a fan of President Trump. So it lets me know that there is some hope, that there are hopefully people coming around. But I hope it's not been too late that we woke up. We should have been awoke all along. And that's a bigger question. And I think it goes back down to what Professor Nic Giordano said tonight about those kids. It was very telling. I hope you caught it. They didn't say nothing during the 2 years that COVID was raging and their rights were being stripped down, and they were literally put in concentration camps in their dorm rooms in these colleges across the campus, masked up like a freaking army soldier. You would have thought they were some kind of in an alien movie with all the masks they had to wear. But let the government try to touch TikTok, their little golden calf, and they got real concerned about their freedom then. It's not just the young people, folks, like that tonight. And I guess we all need to take a look in the mirror and ask ourselves the question, is that us? Is that us? We got a dear goddaughter that comes on this network, Magdalene Rose. And people take shots at her all the time. And Magdalene's just expressing her opinion. I'll let Magdalene express her opinion. I may not even agree with every jot and tittle I hear Magdalene Rose says, but I tell you what I do. I'll listen very carefully to her, because she's speaking to this older generation how these young people are feeling about us. And sometimes it ain't too good. And before we old people condemn the young people and say, well, this young generation is carrying the country to hell. No, the young generation ain't doing it. They wouldn't be carrying the nation to hell if they saw the right example in us. Just a thought. Just a thought. I'll amen myself. I'll amen myself on that. Anyway, Erica says the very fact they treated him differently than anyone else should be against the law. Well, it was against the law, Erica. It was against the law, but, it is what it is. And I think what Professor said tonight, nobody's been held accountable. I'm not sure if anybody will ever be held accountable. Look, Kathy Hochul, basically what she said when she said that, she said, we did this to Trump, but we won't do it to you. If I would have been Trump's lawyers, I know he's going to appeal this. That statement alone, if I'm a jury or if I'm a judge on an appeals bench and I hear the governor say that, I'm not going to disagree with you. It is illegal. But in this messed up justice system we've got, it's about a 50-50 shot that even matter to people. Because I hate President Trump so bad, it don't matter. But that's the state of the communist state of America. We titled the show tonight, The State of Affairs in Communist America. And that's the state of affairs. I want to make it clear to people, we put Israel's mistake in the subject line. I do not believe Israel could have helped what happened. I know that they did not do it deliberately. I will tell you that tonight. That was not a deliberate attempt to kill an American. That was not a deliberate attempt to kill an Australian. It was a mistake in the sense it was an accident. And I probably need to rephrase that. It was an accident. The horror of it is watching the anti-Semitism rage tonight because of it. And we're going to deal with that later this week or next week again soon. And we're going to address it. It's a travesty how people treat Israel when these things happen as compared to Hamas. But anyway, Jake Franchise says, Tennessee is looking better and better each day to move to. Come on down, brother. Come on down. Come on down. Peter says, I live in Chicago. We always vote. Should have seen the election judges' faces when we asked for a Republican primary ballot. Good for you, Peter. Good for you. Good for you. Good for you. Let me do one quick check over here. Dennis Floyd says, regarding who's to blame, he says, I get a piece of political mail almost every day, and regardless of party, I try to do some research as to what they stand for. It doesn't matter because when they get in office, they all lie. They are all there for the money and power. There should be some sort of repercussion. Dennis, that may be true, but, that's politics, and unfortunately, there ain't much you can do to change that. I guess, Dennis, the only thing I would suggest to you is vote for somebody that lies the least. And I'm not saying that I agree with the fact that I'm glad they're lying. I know that you're right. I'm not going to disagree with you. You know, I got an old buddy, Carl Whitaker, whose birthday is tomorrow. I don't know if he's listening tonight, but happy birthday, Carl Whitaker. He ran for governor here in Tennessee back in 2010, and I helped Carl run as an independent. And the very first day I met Carl was 2008, I believe, and I walked up to him and I shook his hand, and he said, I hear you are a politician running for governor. And he looked at me and he shook my hand and started laughing. He's Native American. And he said, don't call me a politician. And I said, okay, I won't. And I just laughed and smiled at him. I said, why don't you want me calling you a politician? He said, well, politician comes from the word poly and tick. It means bloodsuckers. I was in the dentist chair this afternoon, and my dentist is not a political person. We got talking, and I brought up the word politics. He said, we don't allow people talking about politics in the dental office. And with him having that big needle in his hand and a pair of pliers in the other, Chris wasn't about to start talking politics in the dentist chair. So a lot of people, for politics, Dennis, it's scumbaggery, toxic thing to begin with. And I'm not going to disagree with that. But it still does not give us the go-ahead and the green light not to vote. It still doesn't matter, because we have to do our part. We need to pray, let God do his part. And if these politicians go up there and betray us, that's between them and God. You can't get 100% sure on any of them, folks. The Republicans and Democrats, independents, folks, every one of them up there has there's no guarantee, carte blanche, that they're going to do anything that they're called up there to do. You just can't say that they will. You can try your best to get as close to somebody that you feel like you can trust, but let's just be frank with each other here tonight. I know you can't trust any of them, but we can't give up the fight either. We can't just take that attitude and throw everything aside and say, well, I'm never going to vote no more, because that is going to be a recipe for disaster, and we won't have a country. I'm not disagreeing with you, Dennis. I get your point. I do get your point. Rosanna Parsons, good to see you tonight. She says, New York and California residents need to stay put. Please stay put unless you realize that Democrat policies will kill us. You know, Rosanna, that's a great point. And I'm glad what Professor said. He is not leaving his state. He is going to stay and fight for his state. He is going to stay and fight for his state. And I would echo that sentiment tonight. I would echo that sentiment to these folks fleeing these blue states. I know it's rough. Vote the problem out. Because I'm going to tell you something. You come into another state, and we're not going to, us red state folks, us Southerners, we don't want your liberal ways down here. I'm just being honest with you. We love you guys. Y'all welcome. But don't bring your political crap to our state, because we're not going to accept it. And you're going to be just as miserable in a red state as you are in that blue state, if not worse. Because some of these liberals are fleeing because they think they can bring their form of government down south. We just Southerners. I was kidding with Professor Nic Giordano. I was talking about Greg Gutfeld because he's on his show a lot. And I said, you tell Gutfeld that this Southerner said he'd make a good Southerner. And he was telling us how down to earth he was. And I said, well, he'd fit right in down here. Tell him, come on down. Of course, I'll never get him on the McFiles. I tried one time, but he's a good guy. He's the only personality on Fox I really actually like, to be honest with you. But anyway, we're grateful that you've been with us tonight. It's getting late. Dennis, good question. Good statement, my friend. Good statement. And I appreciate the sentiment, and I get what you're saying. I do get what you're saying. I truly do. And we appreciate you doing that tonight. Erica, I don't know if they get blackmailed or not. I don't know if they get blackmailed or not. Carol, I'm with you on that. People are getting discouraged, and I want to end the show on that tonight, on that statement. Folks, don't get discouraged. I know it's hard not to. I get discouraged some days. I've been doing this show for 6 years. I was talking to my nephew today. We were talking about some things regarding the show, and I've been at this fight nonstop for 6 years, and we have been through many a storm. We've been through many an up and down. Our audience has changed throughout. We have waved and weathered things. We have been very discouraged at times. We've been through sickness. We've been through peril. We have been through everything we can, but we're not quitting the fight. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We're still going to be here every night until the Lord comes to me and says, your time is done. You've run your mouth enough. Now go do something else. But we're here every night fighting for this country with guests like Professor Nic Giordano. There's days that I wonder why I do what I do. There's days when I'm with you, Carol. I look at the corruption. I look at the injustice. I look at our justice system. I look at the political system. I look at the toxicity of it. And I shake my head, and I can't see an end to this. I can't see where we fix it, short of revolution. And I can't call for that tonight because that's not going to fix anything. It will create more of a problem. The revolution has got to be in the hearts of the people, and there is a spiritual component to this, folks. We're in the last days. That's the other thing we must realize, that these things are going to get more and more pronounced as we get closer to the coming of the Lord. They just are. They just are. And we can't lose the fight. We got to fight the good fight of faith. But I tell you what else we got to do. We got to stick together. That's part of the problem right now. We've got such a division in our nation, and people are fighting each other instead of coming together and fighting with each other. I'll say that again. Instead of us fighting with each other, they've got us fighting each other. And that's their plan. And we can't let them do that. We can't let them do that, all right? All right, listen, we're grateful you've been with us tonight. Listen, tomorrow night is Wednesday night. It's Faith Night. We'll be on the Faith Network. We've got Miss Dory West, a special, coming up around 6 o'clock Eastern tomorrow. And then tomorrow night we got our McFile Thursday night study. Now, Wednesday night, I say. We may have a special tomorrow. Tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of the super outbreak of April 3rd and 4th of 1974. And we may have a sort of a documentary special about that sometime in the day. It'll just be about 40 minutes or so. It won't be a long one. But that'll be the only thing we have on the news network tomorrow. But Thursday, we got an eclipse coming Monday, the 8th. We will be in Nineveh, Ohio, live, bringing you coverage from there and maybe talking to some of the folks around. But Thursday, we've got a great guest, Troy Anderson. He's not been with me in a long time. I think it was 2019, the last time Troy was with me. He's wrote a book called Trump Apocalypse. It's a great book, and he's got other books, but he has got some insight that he feels like he wants to share with us, and I'm all ears. I want to talk to him about this, and we're going to talk about the eclipse coming up Monday and some of the significance for the country and some of the things about it. We've got Tony Branco coming back this month. We got Ricky Wilson coming back this month. We got Holly Pivac, a new guest, coming this month. Marcia Montenegro will be back toward the end of April. We've got Brad Johnson. Eric Caron's going to be back soon. And James R. is in the bullpen. He said he's ready anytime to come back. We had a great show last night with James R., didn't we? I enjoyed James. So we got a lot of good stuff coming, a lot of faith coming, and as long as you're with me, we're going to be right here every night fighting this fight. It's good to see everybody tonight. If you enjoyed The Professor, not the Professor and Marianne from Gilligan's Island, Professor Nic Giordano, put some fire in that house for me. I'll see you in the morning on the Faith Network on the Bible study. I'll see you tomorrow night on the Faith Network with our shows. And then I'll see you Thursday night back here on the News Network with Mr. Troy Anderson. And until then, McDonald out on this Tuesday night. Grateful you've been with us tonight. Don't give up the fight, folks. Don't give up the fight. And keep the faith out there. We're in this together. Let's fight together and be good stewards of this freedom that we've been given. Have a good night, everybody. Be blessed out there. Good night.